Where does this leave us then? Well, it tells us that although this by itself is a better option, and we were right to integrate it into our project, well, we know that this made our project perform worse from the previous test that we did, so we'll need to use the profiler to try and fix that. And in fact, we're going to do just that in the next chapter. But before we leave this chapter, I should perhaps say that the documentation for JMH is unfortunately very light, and it's actually based around some samples, and you can access the samples from the JMH page on the OpenJDK website. If we scroll down, the link's down here, if you go into samples, and I would suggest that sample number 2, benchmark modes, is probably the most helpful one to look at. You can actually get a list of the command line options to use by running the java-jar benchmarks, but with a -h at the end. This won't actually run the benchmarks, but it will give us a list of the command line arguments that we can use. I maybe need to make this window a bit bigger to make these readable, actually. Let me just do that again. Okay, that's now in a more readable format, and I will leave you to read through these. I guess the most useful thing, I think, is that by default, what we are seeing is the number of operations per second. That's the measurement that JMH is doing. The alternative is to find out how long it takes for the operation to run. And to do that, and in fact I think I will do that, we'll rerun the benchmark, but this time with a command line argument which is -bm. That's saying what's the benchmark mode, and I want the benchmark only to be average time. The code for that, which you can get from the -h output we've just been looking at, is avgt for average time. I'll set that to run. Once again, I'm going to pause the camera and then resume when we've got the results so we can have a look at those. And that version is now finished, and what this is telling us is that the version 1 is taking 0.7 or 700 milliseconds to run each time. Version 2 is taking around 4 milliseconds. Again, we've got these error values, so it's, for example, for version 2 between 3 and 5 milliseconds, for version 1 between 691 and 697 milliseconds. So certainly this is reiterating the fact that version 1 is definitely a better performing method, but we're now getting that in a different format, and in some circumstances knowing how long the methods take to run might be more meaningful than knowing how many times you can call that method in a fixed time period. So that was a basic introduction to JMH, and I hope it's something that might be useful for you. If so, then you'll almost certainly want to read through the instructions, read through the samples to see what else it can do. But in the next chapter, we're going to put everything we've learned in the last few chapters to work, and there'll be some exercises for you to do. So take a break because there's some work coming up, and I'll see you when you're ready in chapter 19.